This is a painting that hangs in Graves Gallery where I work in Sheffield. It's a history painting, but it was painted to inspire people in the present as they are looking at this picture. George Henry Borton was an artist from Norwich whose family emigrated to the United States in 1835 in order to make a better life for themselves. Perhaps he identified then with the Pilgrims. He was self-taught, he travelled backwards and forwards, sketching in Scotland and the Lake District, and eventually he made his studio and his home in London. And he made his name painting pictures like this one of the Pilgrims. He imagined them going to church. He imagined the return of the Mayflower. Vincent Van Gogh, who's in London at the time, working as a congregational minister, wrote a sermon based on one of his paintings, which isn't about the Mayflower pilgrims, but medieval pilgrims setting out for Canterbury. William Bradford, the first governor of the Plymouth colony, describes in his journal what it felt like for those pilgrim feet to set foot on firm soil after the weeks aboard the Mayflower. Being thus arrived in a good harbour and brought safe to land, they fell upon their knees and blessed the God of heaven, who brought them over the vast and furious ocean, and delivered them from all the perils and miseries thereof, again to set their feet on the firm and stable earth, their proper element. I think the character with his finger raised to the heavens in this picture is probably William Brewster, the first colony, the first pastor of the colony. When the Mayflower was buffeted by storms along the coast, he'd raise people's spirits with the reading of Psalm 100. But there are also other people on board the Mayflower. Sailors, would-be farmers and militia. Miles Standish was the head of the landing party, and he was a hired military officer who'd fought with the Dutch against the Spanish, and he became the first commander at Plymouth. This explains the soldiers in this scene. In fact, all the first landing party wore armour and possessed a weapon. Borton's picture is therefore a mixture of piety and adventure. The figure in the centre with the gun looks like he's ready to go exploring, but he's also looking out. Maybe he's ready for trouble too. It appeals to the founding myths of the United States. There are Bibles and guns in equal measure in this painting, and they are still potent and controversial symbols in America today. But what strikes me is this vast and empty beach, hinting at all the future possibilities. But the future is rarely empty. There are people who already inhabit where we want to go. The first landing party marched a mile or so down this beach, and there they encountered a group of First Nation people who understandably ran away. There's no hint of them in this picture. The party then found and excavated a First Nation grave and stole some bushels of corn from it. So what we have here is just one story, one part of it. We have an empty beach. The missing First Nation people are beyond what we can see. In 1970, there were similar anniversary events as there were planned for 2020. The Native American leader, Wamsutta Frank B. James, was asked to give a speech at a state dinner in Plymouth, USA. James was a member of the Wampanoag tribe that inhabited what is now Massachusetts for 12,000 years. He wrote, "This is a time of celebration for you, celebrating an anniversary at the beginning for the white man in America. We, the Wampanoag, welcomed you, the white man, with open arms, little knowing that it was the beginning of the end, that before 50 years were to pass, the Wampanoag would no longer be a free people." But that speech was never delivered. The event's organisers had asked to see an advance copy and proposed an alternative text. Mr. James chose not to participate. He led a protest near Plymouth Rock instead. I hope that the commemorations in 2020 have a different focus, and there has been much more focus on the art and storytelling of indigenous people. Wampum belts are made with beads fashioned from white and purple clam and whelk shells. They were traditionally given when a treaty was signed, but the settlers mistakenly thought they were a form of currency and used them in trade. So what were meant to be these powerful symbolic gifts became part of Northern European ideas of economy. gifts turn to things to be used in consumption. It's rather sad. And then, of course, the Northern Europeans could produce them themselves without any of the understanding or the reverence, and thus these beautiful objects were undermined. One belt made by the Wampanoag, which is the First Nation that first encountered the Mayflower Pilgrims, was lost in the brutal conflict of the 1670s between the settlers and the Wampanoag, which is known as King Philip's War. Their leader, Metacom, was killed, and his belt was sent to England to King Charles II, but it never arrived. Paula Peters, a Native American activist, describes this as the Wampanoag losing their crown jewels. So, in the past few months, there's been a project to create a new wampum belt for the 2020 anniversary, using historic items as reference, but also wanting to share the voice and the story of the Wampanoag today. So please watch this video. It describes the project far better than I can.
Now, I'm often asked why, these historic traditions are so important and why we still carry on these traditions and cultures. And it's just, it's part of what makes us who we are. And I think that it's important for people to know that we are still here, yet, and we live in a contemporary way, but that we still treasure these parts of our tradition.
The last piece of art that I want to show you takes that weaving, takes that beadwork even further and really challenges us. Kanupa Haska Luja is an artist in residence with the Smithsonian Native American Museum. In 2018, he asked First Nation people across the US and Canada to create 2 tiny clay beads, which were then fired and stained in ink and strung together, as you can see. What was revealed was a copy of Sister, a photograph taken by First Nations photographer Carly Spitzer. And what humbles me is that each bead, there's 4,000 of them, represents the life of a missing or murdered Indigenous woman in Canada. It's Canada because the data exists in Canada, it doesn't exist elsewhere. Luja also comments on the fact that there's no data about the Indigenous LGBTQ community. That's a huge number, isn't it? Of people whose faces we do not see. It will hopefully have struck you that the majority of voices as part of MayflowerFest online are white and European. We didn't want that to be the case, but it's a failing and one that gets repeated again and again. We can't have empty beaches. We can't stay within our own frame. We can't have lost gifts and missing people because one voice holds all the power. It's a challenge that we need to take up at every level, friends. Who gets heard and who doesn't? Who gets heard in our church meetings? Do our churches look like the communities they are in? How broad a federation are we really? Who are we willing to partner with, even if that means that we take the back seat sometimes? I really take comfort that God sees every person, that our names are carved in the palm of his hand. I'd like to imagine that maybe God holds a beautiful blue-white bead for every single missing voice.